Columbia River is part of our lives. And when the LNG first reared its ugly head on the Columbia River, there was one proposal downriver from our house, about 20 miles. And then another one popped up way upriver. And then a third one popped up just 5 miles north or upriver from our family. And I thought, oh, I should do something. And I thought, I'm working full time. I still have kids. I am involved in my community and volunteering. I can't possibly take this on. But things evolved and changed, and pretty soon I was involved. I thought, this is too important to our community. It's too important to our future. Let's see what I might be able to contribute here. The river, of course, doesn't know that there's a dotted line down the middle and that it's in 2 different states. So what happened was there were proposals for terminals and proposals for pipelines, and it just affected so many communities that little communities would organize on both the Washington side and the Oregon side. So little organizations on a local level were popping up on both sides of the river. And what became very clear to us very early in the whole thing is that these people had so much money and so many lawyers and so many paid scientists that there was no way that we could do this by ourselves. So we started getting organized on a local level, and then pretty soon reached out to Columbia Riverkeeper. So in the beginning, because there were 3 proposed LNG terminals, because it was affecting land and water in Washington and Oregon, we had all of these fabulous little local communities who were coming together and organizing and learning about LNG and learning about state permitting and federal permitting and how to testify. And it became very clear to us very early on that there was no way that we could do this by ourselves. This was literally David and Goliath. And so we began to reach out to every environmental organization that we knew or knew of in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of them would say, you know, this is an important issue, but our plates are full. We can't take this on. We understand your plight, but that's not in our wheelhouse. Those are not topics that we cover. And we just weren't finding anyone who could or would work with us. And then my very good friend Peter Hutala said, let's talk to Columbia Riverkeeper, and we did. And Columbia Riverkeeper was the one organization in the Pacific Northwest that said, yes, we will work with you on this. We got your back. We will stand with you. And Columbia Riverkeeper then was our representative in the court cases that were happening at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. They had office help, paid office help, which we thought was very exciting for those of us working at the kitchen tables, evenings and weekends. We had the most wonderful community organizer in the world, Dan Sears, who came and met with us on a monthly basis. So we just had this wealth of talent and knowledge and people who loved the river as much as we did. And one of the things that I love about Columbia Riverkeeper is that they never dictated to us. They never said, this is how we will proceed, this is our strategy. They always said, what do you at the local level want to do? How do you want to do it? How can we support you? And it was just this beautiful relationship between local community people and Columbia Riverkeeper. There were so many hearings that we as local community participated in. In those days, we were testifying to city councils and county commissioners and state agencies and federal agencies that we got pretty good at testifying in public, but what was incredible and overwhelming is that we are just regular folks, citizens who live in our communities, and we were literally at my house working at the kitchen table on evenings and weekends in order to fight these huge companies and in order to get ready to submit written testimony or oral testimony. Very early on, one of the hearings that we went to in Astoria, which is the biggest city in the estuary at the mouth of the Columbia River, and I live outside in the country, but Astoria is our neighboring city. So we were getting ready to go to Astoria to testify. We were going to testify in the high school cafeteria. And when we got there, and it was on a weekday, so people had taken off work, took their lunch and came and signed in and stood in line so that they could testify. And what we came into was that, in this case, it was Bradwood. They had rows and rows of lawyers, paid lawyers that they had flown in from all around the country, including Texas. They had a whole row of scientists that they had brought in. So they had these people that were bought and paid for. And one of the most amazing parts to me is that they had biologists who came and testified, and obviously that testimony was bought and paid for, and ended up saying that if indeed they put an LNG terminal on the Columbia River and pipelines under the Columbia River and through our communities, that it would be good for the Columbia. And they even had huge signs, and it said, Bradwood LNG, good for the Columbia. And I think the most amazing one to me was that the biologists stood up and testified to things that were so opposite of what was good for our community, for our river, and most especially for the salmon. And I learned a new vocabulary that day, which was biostitutes. I first decided that I would put some energy into this as best I could, with the time and energy that I had. In my heart, I said, okay, I'm going to make a 2-year commitment to this. So it seems like 2 years is a nice long commitment. A lot of times you volunteer for organizations and you stay with them for 6 months or a year. And I thought in 2 years, it'll be up or down or in or out. And so multiple years later, and lots of court cases and lots of testimony and lots of hearings, we knew that Bradwood was on the ropes, and there wasn't any one thing that finished them off, but it was a series of things. And so they had recently been denied a state permit from the state of Oregon. They had recently been turned down for permits at the county level. And so it was sort of death by 1,000 cuts. We knew we were getting close, but we had just been in this struggle for so long. We had no idea if and when it would ever end. And then I was in Astoria shopping, and I came out. I always leave my cell phone in the car, and I picked it up, and it had the phrase the young people use is it was blowing up. And I had multiple messages, and I started to listen to them, and they were telling me that Bradwood Landing had withdrawn the permits. And for us to withdraw the permits, to stop the permitting process, was the piece that we needed. So I called, my girlfriend went to her house, and then we called other people like Columbia Riverkeeper, who confirmed, yes, indeed, they had pulled out, and we were crying. And the Daily Astorian, we are lucky to have a local owned paper that publishes regularly. We were lucky through this process to have great young people with a science background who wrote articles on LNG through the whole process. And she called and said, Cheryl, can I have a quote? And I was just literally crying. I said, I can't talk to you right now. I'm crying too hard. So I called her back later in the day. She now works for Oregon Public Broadcasting and is a wonderful journalist. And the next day, in the headline article that she wrote, for one of the first times in her life, Cheryl was speechless on the topic of LNG. friend said, "How can you do this? How can you just keep going? It just seems to take so much time and so much energy, and it's so endless." And one of the beautiful, incredible things that came out of that entire process were the friendships and the people that we met. Because the LNG affected the Columbia River, it affected both Washington and Oregon. We met and became very good friends with people who lived just across the river from us in Washington on a beautiful little island that we weren't even aware of before. So those friendships are one of the strongest lasting things that came out of that long fight. And for me too, I now have two granddaughters who weren't born when we started this process, but they know the words LNG and what it means, and they know that Grammy worked to keep the river safe for us. So that's one of the things that keeps me going. And because we worked so hard to organize that original, those grassroots organizations are still alive and carrying on. The LNG fight then evolved into a lot of people being very organized to work with clean water and forestry, those streams that start in the forest and flow into the Columbia River, especially here in the estuary. So beautiful things that came out of that and that carry on in my life even now.